when we hit 12 employees, I felt like everything hit the fan. I had no idea what to do. And I wished that I could have hired somebody to come on and shadow me and say, here's what you're doing every day. Here's what you should be doing every day. I didn't have the money to do that, so I figured it out on my own, and we went from 12 employees working 70, 80-hour weeks to over 50 employees with a company that runs itself. And here's how I did it. So if I were to go back and watch myself and then give myself advice on here's what you should be doing every day, it would start off with the morning routine. I was waking up early, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but I was going straight to the office. That works, and it's necessary when there are these sprints in the business where you have to get the project done for the customer, you have to close the deal, and you have to be in there for 20 hours in that day for day after day after day. But if you compound that week after week, it doesn't work. So instead of jumping right in, I would wake up at 4 and immediately get a huge glass of water. When you wake up, your mind is dehydrated, your brain functions on water. So a huge glass of water. And then I start journaling, and that really gets my mind moving. It takes the thoughts that I have from my mind, gets them down on paper, and lets me know which ones I want to analyze more. After that, I get some reading in and then review my goals and visualize what the outcome of those goals are going to be. It's amazing to me that it actually worked, that every day for 7 years, I would go through and visualize having a company where my company is today. And then it actually came to fruition. Visualizing at the beginning of the day aligned all of my actions to that goal. And it also helped me to see things that weren't in my normal line of sight. It's like when you're shopping for a car, you start seeing that car everywhere on the road. If you ask the question, how do I 10x my business? Then those answers become clear as you move forward. After that, I'd head to the gym. And I think what people don't realize is the intense physical toll that being a CEO takes on you. You're going to be flying from conference to conference. You're going to be flying out to meet with customers. You're going to have long hours. And if you're not taking care of your health, then you can't manage the massive load that's placed on you. This idea of physical health really came to a head when I was sitting there late with my wife talking about some business problems, trying to solve them. And I had this massive sharp pain in my chest, and she looks at me, she's like, what's wrong? And I tell her, just got this pain in my chest. It extended down to my arm, extended down to the end of my left leg. And she of course panicked, and I went directly to the emergency room and got the EKG, got all the tests done, met with the doctor, and he said, this is not something that's wrong with you physically. This is just a side effect of stress. What do you do for a living? So I'm an entrepreneur and started my own business. At that point, I knew I have to be able to decompress, and I can't do 20-hour days day after day after day. After the gym, I get my meditation in. And the reason I like doing that after the gym is because I'm wide awake, and meditation isn't the time to sleep. It's really not even a time to relax. It's a time for my mind to be ultra focused and observant on one single thing. And so I'll observe my breath for 8 to 15 minutes. And every time my mind wanders, I'll bring my mind right back to my breath. After I get my meditation in, and oftentimes it's at the sauna or the steam room in the gym, then I'll head to work, grab a smoothie or milkshake on the way, and get to the office around 6:30, 7 o'clock. Once I get to the office, I jump right in to a task that I have scheduled. A mistake that I made early on is I was always on call. My phone was always on, alerts were always on. I could always be accessed through email, through text. And the problem with that is the more time that I spent answering those calls, responding to those emails, which I thought, man, it's going to move the business forward because I'm so responsive. I'm Johnny on the spot. It was actually keeping me from moving the business forward because I couldn't spend time on the most important tasks. And I understand the difficulty there. The reason your customers are with you is because you are so responsive. And so you don't need to go cold turkey and stop answering any calls, but you can go through this process of always being on to checking your phone 7 times a day, and then 5 times a day, then 3 times a day, and then 1 time a day. And I got to that 1 time a day, and now I only check my texts, my emails once a day. To get to once a day, you need a business that's running itself, or you need a virtual assistant that can contact you, and their number, even if your phone's on Do Not Disturb, is whitelisted so that they can still contact you and say, hey, there's emergencies that you need to take care of. So at this point in the day, I haven't checked my phone, and I've already got my mind where it needs to be. I've got my body where it needs to be, and I've accomplished accomplished one of my most important tasks. And then I start checking my phone. I check my emails, see what needs to be taken care of. The structure of the day is to have 3 90-minute jam sessions set aside with a 15 to 30-minute gap in between. It's incredible what you can accomplish when you dedicate 3 different chunks of time to a single task. You'll come away accomplishing more in that 4.5 hours than you would in an entire 10-hour workday when you're just spending those 10 hours playing whack-a-mole and putting out fires. There's 2 important things with the 90-minute jam sessions. 1, I have to be in flow. And 2, I have to be working on the right things. The idea of flow was brought about in the 1980s by a researcher named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he had this observation that he would do tasks and time would pass without him knowing, and he'd be at his peak performance and an incredible amount of enjoyment. And he realized that there's triggers that can be put in place so that we can be in flow. So think about a time where you're playing a sport and you can't miss, or a time that you're making a sale and you say all the right things at the exact right time. That's being in flow. And that can actually be induced by doing the right activities beforehand and structuring the activity itself in the right way. Your morning routine is going to be the perfect set of activities, the meditation, the working out, to prime you to have the highest likelihood to get into flow. The activity itself needs to be structured right. And the 4 things that will pull you out of flow in the activity is 1, a lack of clarity on what you're trying to accomplish. 2, distractions. 3, friction to get started. And 4, the improper amount of stimulus. So I'll break each of those down. First, lack of clarity on the outcome. When you start a task, you need to know, what do I want to accomplish in the next 90 minutes? Is it to have made 10 phone calls? Is it to have written this proposal? Is it to have redlined an entire agreement that's going to be a contract for an important new client? What is the outcome? What's the desired end result? Number 2, eliminating distractions. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb, close your door, hang a sign on it if you need to, so that you can't be distracted. We live in this perpetual state of anxiety because your phone goes off and you check the text or check the email, and then even if you don't respond to the email, your mind just switched and pivoted to this other task that needs to be done. And so your anxiety has a slight spike. And that process keeps you out of deep mental focus and concentration. If you're actually able to maintain flow, you'll be 6 times more productive and more creative on whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. The third is friction to start the task. And this comes into play when there's a lot of steps that have to occur before you can actually start executing. A good example would be in creating this YouTube video. If I had to find a spot, I had to travel somewhere to get to that spot, I had to set up lights, I had to set up the camera, had to jump through a bunch of hoops to actually start recording, then it's going to keep me from being in flow because I'm going to have exhaustion before I even get started. And so I already have the tripod set up. I already have the lights set up so that when I start, all I have to do is press play. The last thing that keeps you from being in flow is the improper amount of stimulus. The Yerkes-Dodson law perfectly explains this. If you think about a graph, and on the y-axis going up and down, you have your level of performance. So you're a low performer if you're low on the y-axis, and at your peak performance if you're all the way at the top of the y-axis. And on the x-axis, you have different levels of stimulus, and you can associate this with anxiety. And we've thought historically, we've been conditioned to think that anxiety is a negative, and that's actually not true. Anxiety is a neutral, and if we have too little of it, it could be a negative, and if we have too much of it, it could be a negative. But at our peak performance, our anxiety is actually serving us. And this is how. If you think about the anxiety stimulus, when it's super low, then you're apathetic, which means that your performance is going to be lower on that scale. And it's this bell curve that as your anxiety increases, that you get to this point where it's excitement. It's the butterflies in your stomach right before you're going to have a massive performance. And you're actually going to peak at your performance at that amount of stimulus. Now, there's times where it becomes so much anxiety that you move from excitement to panic and then fear, and you come back down the other side of the bell curve, and your performance actually decreases. So the solution here is, if you have a task that's kind of mundane, but you have to do it and you've put it into this jam session, then stack a couple more tasks in there with that task so that the timeline is shrunk, which is going to make you execute faster, which is going to spike your anxiety to that level and increase it so that you can be at your peak performance. On the flip side, if you know that this task is going to induce panic and induce fear into you, then you need to become better at the task that you're doing. And so instead of jumping right into the task, maybe it's sales, you have a 90-minute session prior, and you're going to have your second jam session be actually making the calls. But your first jam session is going to be practicing on what you're going to be executing. Because as you get better in that skill, the anxiety is going to shift back to a lower state of stimulus, and you're going to be at your peak performance. So shorten the time it's going to take to get the task done, or practice the skill and get better at it, and that will get you the peak level of performance. Once you're in flow on these activities, you need to make sure you're working on the right activity. It's not enough to be 6 times more productive and more creative on something that is not actually going to get you to your end goal. And there's an equation for this. It goes from being an employee when you start your own company to then being the manager, and then you're the leader, and then you're the investor. As you start the company, there's no way to not wear every single hat unless you have a bunch of partners and a bunch of investors and you can hire everything out. But that's not how I did it. And I think that's much more rare to go raise a capital. And in my opinion, also a waste of money, because you're not figuring out the things that need to be figured out at this stage in the business. So you are going to have to come on and you're going to be the technician or the product builder. In addition to that, you're going to be selling it. You're going to be marketing it. You're going to be doing your own finances. You're going to be doing your own recruiting. You do wear every single hat. And this is why the beginning stages of the startup are so difficult. It's way easier to get from $2 million to $5 million than it is to get from 0 to $1 million. And part of that reason is because you have to wear all of these hats. To do that, you're going to have to add in these jam sessions. And if you can't do 3 90-minute sessions in one day, then start off with 1. And then once you can do 1 consistently, then add a second, and then add a third. When you are in the throes of it and you're wearing every single hat in these jam sessions, there's 3 things that you need to take care of. Figure out how to generate more sales. Until you get to $1 million in revenue, your only task is getting to $1 million of revenue, or at least break even. The second item you want to work on in the jam sessions is recruiting. Your business is only going to grow if you can bring on people to replace you in the tasks that you're doing. The caveat here is that you can't replace yourself with entrepreneurs. I made the mistake 3 times in a row. I hired 3 people my first year, and 2 of them left and I fired 1 of them. And the reason was I recruited employees to be entrepreneurs. If they were entrepreneurs, they would start their own business, or they would come on and be a partner with you and help you grow your business as an equity partner. When you're recruiting, you're going to recruit employees, and employees are excellent at executing what's already been established. So that brings me to the third item that you need to work on when you're moving from employee to manager, which is building processes. The reason the processes are so necessary is because you're going to hire people that are going to come on and not know how to build processes themselves. As a founder, you can't outsource the process building activities to someone you're hiring to be an independent contributor on your front lines. They just don't have the experience, and they're going to fall flat on their face. They're going to fail, and they're going to make you fail, and it's going to be incredibly painful for you as you go through this process. So make sure that when you are recruiting, you have the processes built so that it will set them up to be successful, because they will make you successful. There will come a point where you have a few people, you have this entity that's running, you're not having to wear every single hat, and that's probably 5 to 7 employees, where you're now getting to be the manager and not just the technician. You've outsourced that activity. Now, in your 90-minute jam sessions, the most important problems that are to be solved are recruiting, creating a vision, creating a culture, and creating alignment. When you get to the point where you have the 5 to 7 employees, you can now shift from being the independent contributor to then being the manager. That's an amazing transitionary stage, because you're no longer the technician. You're no longer wearing every single hat. You have a team that's helping you do it. However, you need to move from being a manager of all of these people to the leader who is leading the managers who are leading the people. To do that, you will again have to recruit. That will never go away. Part of leading a company is recruiting great people. You'll have to create the vision and the culture. Right now, that vision and culture is housed within you, and you can shed that on everyone else because you're with them. But once you're at 20 employees, 40 employees, 50 employees, you're not going to be able to give them that vision and that culture just by interactions. It has to be baked in to the business that you've created. And then lastly, you have to create clarity on how you're going to execute that vision and align everyone in the organization behind that single goal. At this stage, the type of people you're recruiting changes. When you're under 7 employees, you're recruiting people that can be 80% as good as you are at the tasks they're executing on. To become a leader instead of a manager, you have to recruit managers that are 120% or 200% or 500% better than you at any task individually. That means that your software developer is going to be able to outdevelop you. Your salesperson is going to be able to run circles around you. Your operations person has been Six Sigma certified and knows what they're doing and can build the standard operating procedures in your business. And as you have these people that are highly capable, you can then align them behind your singular vision. And you go from managing people to inspiring and aligning a group of highly capable individuals who then lead the company and their individual departments. The very last step is moving from leader to investor. And there's 2 ways to do that. One, you can sell your company and then invest that into another company or into real estate, whatever it is that you choose. Or 2, you can retain ownership in your company and hire somebody to replace you as the leader of the company. And the skill set that you need when you're working in those 90-minute jam sessions to move from a leader to an investor is again recruiting. This is only going to work if you have the right person to lead your company. That's not an easy hire. It's extremely difficult. In addition to recruiting, you also need to have strategy. Fortunately, at that point, you won't have to figure it out by yourself because you'll have your executive team who's leading the rest of the company, who's seeing everything in the business, who's talking to customers. And you'll also have this person that's going to lead your company. You've seen it from the beginning. They're going to see it the rest of the way, and you can collaborate and create that strategy together. So after you have your 4.5 hours of jam sessions booked and occurring every single day, the next thing to add into your schedule is lunch with somebody. I have this rule that I never eat alone. Every single time I eat, I am with somebody. I love the phrase, your network will become your net worth. And in addition to that, you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. So whenever I have lunch, I always make sure it's with somebody else, because that might be somebody I'm going to recruit. That might be a potential customer. Whoever it is, I'm going to learn something from them. And it might be somebody that I can add value back to, which is extremely fulfilling. Outside of the morning routine, the jam sessions, having lunch with somebody else, the only other items to be done are everything else that's left in the business. But it has to go in order and be prioritized through the morning routine and then the jam sessions and then the lunch with somebody else and then everything else in the business. You've heard the metaphor of the rocks, the pebbles, and the sand. If you try and put the sand in first when you're filling up a bucket and then the pebbles and then the rocks aren't going to fit. But if you start with the rocks and then you add the pebbles and then you add the sand, all of it will fit and you can put the lid on the bucket. So that's a day of everything that needs to be accomplished, how it's accomplished, and what the focus is. At the end of the day, I always go through, check my emails, that's my one time, and then I plan out the next day. Again, that's going to give me clarity and the ability to start those tasks quickly, which is going to let me get into flow faster, be more productive, and more creative. Lastly, at the end of the day when I leave, I will turn my phone on Do Not Disturb and oftentimes leave it in my car so that I can be fully present at night. That activity is a huge primer to be able to get into flow the next day.